My husband announced he was divorcing me and taking my company in the settlement, but the lawyer he hired couldn't stop laughing when he heard the details. Richard served me divorce papers on a Monday morning while I was preparing for a board meeting. Just walked into the kitchen, dropped the envelope next to my coffee, and said he wanted half of everything plus the company. My company. The one I started in our garage 8 years ago while he played video games in the living room. The one he called my little hobby until it started making real money. I stayed calm and asked him what he meant by taking the company. He smirked and said community property laws meant half of everything acquired during marriage was his. Since my company was built during our 10 years together, he owned 50% minimum, but since he supported me emotionally and financially, he deserved all of it. I reminded him that he'd been unemployed for 6 of those 10 years, that I'd paid our mortgage, our bills, bought his car, funded his failed podcast equipment, and supported his dream of becoming a professional poker player. What financial support was he talking about? He got defensive and said his presence was support enough. Being married to him gave me the stability to build the business. That, without him, I would have been too emotional and scattered to succeed. His exact words were, "You needed a man's influence to make good decisions." The company hit $5 million in revenue last year. We have 42 employees, 3 office locations, and contracts with major retailers. Richard's contribution was occasionally asking if I was still playing businesswoman and complaining when I worked late. But now he wanted it all because he deserved compensation for tolerating my career. Thursday was our first meeting with lawyers. Richard had hired someone named Walter who wore a suit that didn't fit and kept checking his phone. I brought my divorce attorney, Catherine, who'd handled my business incorporation years before Richard even knew what an LLC was. Richard started the meeting with a speech about how he'd sacrificed his own career ambitions to support my dreams, how he'd attended boring company events, smiled at insufferable clients, and pretended to care about quarterly reports. Therefore, he wasn't just entitled to half, but to full control since he'd suffered more. Walter nodded along, taking notes on a yellow pad. Catherine sat silent, occasionally glancing at documents in a folder. Then Richard said the magic words that changed everything. "Of course," Richard said proudly. "I've been involved since day one. I named the company. I designed the logo. I even signed the incorporation papers as co-founder. That's documented proof of my ownership." Catherine looked up. "You signed incorporation papers? As co-founder?" Richard puffed out his chest. "Absolutely. My signature is on everything. I made sure of that when she started the business. I wanted to protect my investment." Catherine opened her folder and pulled out a document. "This incorporation paperwork? With your signature right here?" She pointed to a line on the page. Richard leaned forward, examining it. "Yes, exactly. That proves I'm a co-founder. 50% owner minimum." Walter reached for the document to review it. He read for about 30 seconds before his face changed. He read it again. Then he started laughing. Not a chuckle, but actual laughter. The kind where you have to put the paper down and compose yourself. Richard looked confused. "What's so funny? This is legal documentation of my ownership." Walter wiped his eyes and turned to Richard. "You signed a spousal consent form, not incorporation papers. A consent form, waiving all rights to the business in perpetuity. It literally says you acknowledge having zero ownership stake and agree to never make any claims against the company." But Richard interrupted. "That's impossible. She told me it was partnership papers." Catherine smiled for the first time. "Actually, I have the email where I explicitly told you it was a waiver of rights. You responded, and I quote, 'Whatever. Just tell me where to sign so you stop bothering me during the game.' You signed away any claim to the company 8 years ago because you couldn't be bothered to read what you were signing." Richard's face went purple. "She tricked me. You can't enforce that." Walter was still trying not to laugh. "Actually, it's completely enforceable. You signed it in front of a notary. There's a video recording of the notary explaining what you were signing. You said yes. You understood. You literally gave up any rights to the business before it even made its first dollar." "But I'm her husband," Richard sputtered. "That has to count for something." Walter closed his briefcase. "It counts for the standard asset division. You'll get half the house equity, half the joint savings. But the company? You have better odds of winning the lottery than getting a penny from that business."